So for a long time, we were coming across a common topic, which is running VUser as a process and running VUser as a thread. So in this video, I will explain you what is the difference between running a VUser as a process and running a VUser as a thread. So let's start with what is running VUser as a process, what it means. So when you run a VUser or a virtual user as a process, each virtual user operates as a separate independent instance of the driver program, which is the mdrv.exe. So we'll see what is mdrv.exe in a separate video. But for now, the point here is each one, like each virtual user operates as a separate independent instance of the driver program. And it's like opening a new copy of the same program for every user you're running. And when it comes to the memory usage, this approach of running VUser as a process requires more memory because each virtual user has its own dedicated memory space and none of the memory is shared between the virtual users. So this is very important. None of the memory is shared between the virtual users because you're running virtual users as a process, and this can lead to high RAM consumption, especially if you're running many virtual users at once. And when it comes to the execution details, and since each virtual user is running independently, and if one of them crashes or has an issue, it won't affect the others. So this is a advantage, I would say, because this isolation makes the system more stable when you are dealing with applications that could potentially crash or need a lot of resources. So when to use? Running virtual users as a process, the first topic which we are discussing, is ideal for applications that are resource intensive or not thread safe. So, for example, you can include heavy client applications like Citrix or SAP GUI, where each virtual user might need a lot of computing power, or where you want to ensure that one user's problem does not affect the others. So let me just do a quick recap. When you're running a virtual user as a process, each one operates as a separate, independent instance of the driver program. And it's like opening a new copy of the same program for every virtual user you're running. And when it comes to memory usage, this approach requires more memory because each virtual user has its own dedicated memory space and none of the memory is shared between the virtual users. And when it comes to execution detail, if one of the user gets crashes, it will not affect the others because all of them are isolated, and this isolation makes the system more stable when you're dealing with applications that potentially crash or need a lot of resource. And finally, when to use. So this is a very critical thing. So when to use, that's a more important thing, right? So you have to use this virtual users as a process when you are running client applications like Citrix or SAP GUI. So if you are testing a Citrix application or SAP GUI, then running virtual user as a process is the right approach. So now let's see what is running a virtual user as a thread. So what it means. So when you are running a virtual user as threads, multiple virtual users are managed by a single instance of the driver program, which we already saw, the mdrv.exe. And it's like having one program open that's handling many tasks simultaneously. So previously, when it comes to running as a process, you are like the users are operating independently and they are opening new copy of the same program. But when it comes to running as a thread, multiple users are managed by a single instance of the driver program, and it's like having one program that open, and that's handling many tasks simultaneously. So when it comes to the memory usage, this method, that is running virtual user as a thread, is more efficient in terms of memory because all the virtual users share the same memory space, and instead of each virtual user needing its own chunk of memory, they all dip into the same pool, which reduces the overall memory usage. So when it comes to the execution details, the threads share resources within the same process and run at the same time. However, if one thread encounters an issue, it could impact the other threads running within the same process because we all know they're interconnected. So in the previous one, if one of them virtual user failed, it won't impact the others, right? But in when you're running as a virtual user as a thread, they all share resources within the same process, and since they run at the same time, if one of the thread encounters an issue, it could impact the other threads running within the same process because, as I told you, they're interconnected. So this can be a downside if you're running, if you have stability as a concern. And finally, when to use. So running virtual user as a thread is a good choice for web-based applications or situations where you want to maximize the number of virtual users without using too much memory. So when memory is your concern, you can run the virtual users as a thread. And this is particularly useful when working with limited resources, allowing you to simulate a large number of users more efficiently. So now you understood where you have to use virtual users as a process and where you have to use virtual users as a thread. So next time when somebody asks you like if you are going to test your application using a SAP or a Citrix, you're going to select run virtual user as a process. And when you're going to test your application for like mobile applications or web applications, you're going to choose run virtual user as a thread. So now let's move on to the next part of this video. So now let's see what is the advantage of running the virtual user as thread over the process. So when you run a virtual user, uh, which is basically is how the approach of doing the testing. So when you run virtual users as threads instead of process, you get several benefits. So one of the first benefit is the memory efficiency. So when virtual users run as threads, like I told you, they share the same memory space within a single process, and this is like having one big box where all the virtual users store their stuff together instead of giving each one their own separate box. Since they're separate, sharing this setup, they'll use a lot less memory. On the other hand, if you run a virtual user as its own process, they don't share memory. They each get their own box. This means you will need much more memory overall, which can really eat up your computer's resources. The second point is higher virtual user capacity. And because threads uses less memory, you can run more virtual users on the same machine when they are threads instead of processes. And it's like fitting more people into same room by having them share space more efficiently. And this is super helpful when you need to simulate a lot of users without needing extra hardware. And then the third part, which is the better resource utilization. So threads make better use of your computer resources, and they allow LoadRunner to test more users at once without overloading the system. And this works especially well for web applications or any software that's designed to handle multiple tasks at the same time. So if the application you're testing can handle multiple threads, which are running virtual users as threads, it will help you test more user in a more efficient way. So in a nutshell, overall, I would say that virtual users as threads is a smarter choice when you want to test as many users as possible without needing a bunch of extra computers or memory. So just to make sure the application you're testing can handle multiple threads at once and you're good to go. So let me do a quick recap. And the first part is the memory efficiency, because it's when you're running your test as a thread, you're sharing the same memory space within a single process, and it's like having a one big box where all the virtual users store their stuff together. And then when it comes to the higher virtual user capacity, so because threads uses less memory, you can run more and more virtual users on the same machine when they are threads instead of processes. And it's like fitting more people into the same room by having them sharing like same space more efficiently. And when it comes to the last part, which is the better resource utilization, since the threads make better use of your computer resources, it's because of the memory efficiency, and again, it's because of the higher virtual user capacity. So basically, the threads make the better use of your computer resources, and they allow LoadRunner to test more users at once without overloading them. So this especially is well for web applications, like I told you. uh, Again, I'm giving a recap. So if you're running virtual users as a thread, that is for the applications like web applications or mobile applications. So these are the three advantages, which is the memory efficiency, the higher virtual user capacity, and the resource utilization. So now after this, we'll see what are the advantages of running virtual user as a process. So previously we saw the advantage of running the virtual user as a thread in LoadRunner. Now we'll see what are the advantage of running the virtual users as a process in the LoadRunner. So when you're testing the client-based applications with LoadRunner, sometimes it's better to run your virtual users as separate processes instead of threads. So here's why. So isolation. So that's the first part. So each virtual user runs in its own separate process, meaning they are completely isolated from each other, right? So that's the isolation part where you're running virtual users as a processes, okay? And imagine each virtual user is in its own bubble. What one does inside its bubble does not affect the others. So this is really useful for applications that don't handle shared resources well, or might mess up if multiple V users are working together too closely. So that is the reason if your applications comes under those criteria, then running virtual users as a process is the right choice. So when it comes to compatibility, some applications and protocols don't play nice with threads, so they need their own space to work properly. So running virtual users as a process ensure that every virtual user has its own memory space, which can be crucial for certain protocols that are not thread safe. And this way, you are making sure the application behaves just like it would under real world conditions, especially when it's under heavy load. And thirdly, the stability. So since each virtual user is in its own process, if one crashes or runs into an error, it does not affect the others. And it's like if one person in a group makes a mistake, but it does not mess up what everyone else is doing. So this makes the whole testing process more stable, especially for complex client heavy applications that might be more prone to errors. Like, so when it comes to the for complex and it comes like client heavy applications, so the Citrix or the SAP GUI are the right example of when you want to run a test using the visual user as a process. So overall, in a nutshell, I would say running visual users as a process is a great choice when you need stability and compatibility with certain protocols, even though it uses more memory than running them as threads. So if you're dealing with applications that need a lot of client side resources or they don't handle threads well, so this approach is the way to go. So far, we saw about the advantages of both running VUsers as a thread and running VUsers as a process. Now we'll see a quick the other side of the disadvantages. So when it comes to the disadvantages of running VUsers as a thread, the first part is the stability risk. So since all the visual users share the same memory space, so now we are talking about uh, running virtual user as a thread. So all these virtual users share the same memory space, and if one thread crashes or has an issue, it could potentially mess up all the others running in the same process, and it's like a domino effect. One problem can impact everyone else. And when it comes to the compatibility issues, not all applications and protocols are thread safe, meaning they cannot handle multiple tasks at once within the same space. So if you try to run these kind of applications as threads, you might run into errors or unexpected behavior. And when it comes to limited use cases, this method works great for web-based applications and situations where you need to run lots of visual users with limited memory. But for heavy duty client-based applications that need more resources or careful handling, threads might not be up to the task. So now we'll see the disadvantages of running virtual users as a process. So when it comes to running virtual users as a process, the first disadvantage is the high memory usage. So that's the main criteria. So because each virtual user run in its own separate process, it uses more memory, and each virtual user has its own space, which adds up quickly, meaning you will need more RAM to support large number of users, and it has lower virtual user capacity because it's more memory intensive, and you won't be able to run as many visual users on a single machine compared to threads. And this could mean needing more hardware if you are trying to simulate a lot of users. So the final part is the resource intensive. So running visual user as a process puts more strain on your system resources overall. So this could lead to slower performance or the need for more powerful hardware, especially if you are dealing with large scale testing. So to sum it up finally, before we close this, so threads are efficient but can be less stable and are not suitable for all applications. I mean, running virtual user as a thread. So like I told you, they are efficient. Yes, running virtual users as a thread are efficient, but it can be less stable and are not suitable for all applications. And running virtual users as a process offers stability, compatibility, but require more memory and resources. So choosing between them depends on what you are testing and the resources you have with you. So before we close on, let me ask few questions on the topic so far we discussed, so you can comment them in the comment section so that we can understand how well you have understood the topics. So before I complete the video, let me ask you two simple multiple choice questions. So the first question is, I mean, like again, if you know the answer, please do comment in the comment section for the question one and question two. So the first question is, what is the primary advantage of running virtual user as a thread in the LoadRunner? You have the choices here. You can answer this in the comment section. And the second question is, why might running visual user as a process be less efficient than running them as threads? So you and I have given the answer for that, whether it leads to slower system stability, or it supports fewer protocols, or it requires more memory and system resource. Sorry, I missed the C here, and it increases the risk of shared resource conflict. So if you know the answer, please do comment in the comment section for both question one and question two. So until I meet you in our next video, it's bye bye from Asan Shanmugam and your favorite Little Star YouTube channel. Take care and bye bye.